Here we've got a picture of the plate tectonics maps, and hopefully when you see that as good geographers, you're going to go, oh yes, I can remember the names of the plates, because often what will happen in an exam is that they might show you a piece of the world and they might say, name these two plates. The Nazca plate is the one that lots of people need to remember when we're talking about South America, the South America plate and the Nazca plate, because most of the other plates are labelled after big areas. So you've got the Eurasian plate, the Pacific plate. If you know your world geography, you know the name of the plates, but the Nazca is the one you need to know. So here we've got constructive and destructive plate margins. Again, know that diagram, learn that diagram, sketch over it with a piece of paper and a tracing pad and just put your own labels in it and practice, become familiar. So here we've got this idea of how do you make a mind map. Use pictures, words, help you remember key points. It's a brain dump. It's how make your learning of your subject become real to you. It doesn't matter what other people's looks like, because it's your learning and it's how you are going to say to the examiner, this is what I've learned and this is what I know. So you can use mind maps. You can use these things called oversheets. If you're a person who likes order, then you can use squares. If you want to be creative and flow, then use mind maps. Tables, diagrams and flow charts. Here we've got this idea of physical and human social factors that affect the vulnerability for when you're living in an area of volcanoes. You can think about using that as a place to fill in. What is it that makes something vulnerable when an earthquake goes off? You've got things like ash flow, you've got things like lava flow, you've got things like large areas of land suddenly being covered. So roads get blocked and people find it difficult to get there to access when things are going wrong. So you need to think about what ideas can you put into your revision. I'll give you some more content later on, this idea of a flashcard. Again, can you label the diagrams? Being able to label the diagrams in geography gets you marks, and simple diagrams in plate tectonics can be really helpful in gaining extra marks, because if you've missed to clarify a point slightly, you might find that the examiner understands that you know your knowledge because you've given an appropriate diagram. There's a video here about Cornell notes. If this is something that appeals, then take 3 minutes and 24 seconds and have a go at consolidating some of your learning through Cornell. Stories. Here we've got a picture, and hopefully if you were to look at this, you'd go, yes, that's a pyroclastic flow. So how does this pyroclastic flow affect people? To start off with, what is a pyroclastic flow? Pyro means hot and clastic means rock, and it flows, so hot rock movement would get you a mark. How could it affect the people in the environment and the economy? So here we've got the E and the environment and the economy out of that SEEP mnemonic that I was talking about. Being able to annotate the photograph with suitable labels in 3 diagrams. You've got a mud flow for number 1, you've got you've got rocks probably at the bottom of the flow in number 2, and you've got hot steam and ash at number 3. Again, looking at the exam, they will tell you how many marks it's worth. If you want some idea as to how to create stories in revision, there's another video for you to watch on this slide. So now we get to the chunky bit of the revision itself. So we're thinking about the practice and meaning of the use of the terminology. Geography is a language, just like Welsh is a language, English is a language, German is a language. It has certain words which makes it a geographical term. And so geology, geography tends to overlap in this area of plate tectonics. So simply, you need to be able to identify any words which are things like ocean trenches, fold mountains, crusts, ocean ridges, ocean trenches, rift valleys, subduction zones, and magma. There is a little diagram to the right, which is a diagram of a rift valley. What makes it a rift valley as opposed to a glacial valley? They won't ask you to say what makes it a difference between a rift valley and a glacial valley, but we look in geography at rift valleys, glacial valleys, river valleys, and they have all got distinctive features. And when labeling a rift valley, it has steep slides, it has got faults because the land is being pulled apart, and as it's being pulled apart, so the middle bit drops down. Again, more using your language to become confident and fluent. Explosive volcanoes are not the same as the non-violent eruptions that you find in Hawaii, for example. So oceanic crust, continental crust. Continental crust is the thick stuff that we live on. The oceanic crust is very thin and it is underneath the oceans. The hot spots are made where the oceanic crust becomes very thin. Lahars and constructive plate margins, destructive plate margins. These are all words that you need to become familiar with, because you may be able to get a mark by describing, defining, explaining. You have different types of volcanic landscapes. You've got shield volcanoes, stratovolcanoes, and this is where there's quite a big focus in when you come to look at shield volcanoes and stratovolcanoes. Make a table. Put on one side shield volcano and on the other side stratovolcano, and for each of them name an example, give a location, describe its shape, say how it's formed, and say what it's made from. So in simple terms, what would I be looking for? I would be going for a shield volcano, Hawaii, basalt. It's formed at where the oceanic crust rises. It's fairly flat, and it tends to be free flowing, and will have things like pahoehoe associated with it, which is the kind of flow that you get when shield volcanoes are created, whereas a stratovolcano is something like Mount St. Helens. It is a massive volcano that erupts, producing so where would it be? It would be in North America. Its shape, it would be a cone volcano. It's formed when molten magma rises up through the continent, which melts. It's very viscous, it's very sticky. It's something called acid rock. It has associated with it things like the pyroclastic flow, ash, volcanic bombs, and it is explosive and violent and tends to do a lot of damage to an area, and there would be some earthquake associated with that as well. So can you label the parts of the volcano? So you've got ideas of the caldera, the cinder cone, the lava tube, and the ash cloud are all associated with the stratovolcano, and the geyser is the one that's associated with the shield volcano. So be clear in your thinking when you are working through two types of volcanoes. They are quite different, but you can find a label in your box. So here, for example, we've got where they've illustrated putting things into boxes. It simplifies your understanding sometimes. So, for example, do you know that an ocean trench is where subduction takes place? It's a destructive plate margin, and the Mariana Trench on the western Pacific coast is a place where you go for oceanic trenches. Study that table. Take it apart, mess it up, cut it into bits, and re-put it back together so that the Rift Valley is where two continental plates pull apart. It's a place where constructive plate margins are made because the construction is pulling the area apart. And so where it says Thingvellir in Iceland, you could also find a hotspot is where in Hawaii, but the two volcano shapes and the flow of the lava is quite similar. So give yourself time to study, process, and absorb. Earthquakes. Thing about earthquakes is they don't have to be associated with volcanoes, but they often are. Keywords to know is to understand that you've got the difference between an epicenter and the focus, and you can think about the consequences of an earthquake happening. But also with earthquakes in particular, there's quite a big focus on predicting, monitoring. So we have to think about what happens when these earthquakes happen. So we've got the consequences of plate movement. Cause, effect and consequences. The consequences of plate movement. Local, national and international scale. What do we mean by that? Well, on a local scale, it's exactly the place that the earthquake takes place, for example. So you, on a national scale, there are areas which have been affected, not because the volcano, the earthquake itself has been located in that area, but because the people of that country then come to help the locals. And on an international scale, if we were talking about the consequences of a volcano erupting in Iceland, we could say, for example, that the last time there was a massive eruption, people couldn't fly. So on an international scale, the consequences of the plate movement with a volcano erupting would be that people couldn't fly. But international scale for earthquakes would mostly be where people appeal for aid. You find that where there is earthquake, quite often there is poverty. And when and the poverty comes not because this is a rich country or a poor country, but because simply in that moment that the earth shatters your home, you leave with what you've got on your back. So you are poor, you have no shelter, you have no food, you have no water, you won't have your phone charger, you literally have nothing. So people end up living in tents, and the help comes from the national and the international people. So the economic and financial consequences of volcanoes and earthquakes is enormous. You tend to find later on that people will visit volcanoes out of curiosity. So there's an environmental curiosity there. And the physical reaction, the physical responses to earthquakes, things like buildings collapsing, roads being broken, accessibility to the area is impacted simply because there's been a shift in the surface of the land. So time, area, place, magnitude. Magnitude is the word for how big something is. So when you tell the story of an earthquake or a volcano, what happened? Where it happened? When did it happen? Where did it take place? Why did it happen? And who did it affect? Again, the story of a volcano is something that you can draw upon usually in the longer answer questions of the exam. If you take time to look at the Nepalese earthquake, the Montserrat video and the Japanese tsunami, even if you run it in the background whilst you're kind of doing the washing up or something, if you're listening to this stuff, you'll be hearing the geographical language and it will expand your knowledge. And the more you can open your mind to learning, the more you will become confident in the exam. So things like words like seismograph and Richter scale, you need to know what they are. Emergency planning, what do you do if the safest place to stand in an earthquake is in the doorway? And that's because that's the strongest part of the building. Are you aware that the difference between the primary effects of a volcano and earthquake are the things that happen in the moment, and the secondary effects are the things that what happens afterwards? They are different. Study them and take care that you know the difference. So there's a lot to learn in terms of words. But in simple terms, it's volcanoes. There are two types of volcanoes. There are earthquakes which can be associated with volcanoes, but there are earthquakes which aren't always associated with volcanoes. Can you label the world map with the constructive plates, and do you know the differences? So you've spent your time planning your revision. you know where you're going to do it, you've got a few ideas as to how to do it, you've got an idea now of the content of what you need to be familiar with. So the slides that we've just looked at are the content that you're going to be taking forward with you. Know where, when, what time. Review where you are up with your weekly revision. You will struggle sometimes to process. If you've got, I don't know, something going on and you suddenly go, do you know what, I'm not concentrating tonight. Don't push yourself quite so hard. Make sure that what you do is good quality learning rather than getting lost and distracted. So actually just take time to think about how well you've done. Revisit the things that you're not quite familiar with. And in the exam, and this to me is really key, it's the idea of taking deep breaths to calm the nerves and focus the mind. Look at the end of the question, and in there's a little bracket, and it will tell you how many marks there are. And this is also really key. Turn over every page to make sure no questions are missed. It sounds obvious, but people lose marks because they didn't turn over the last page. And it can make a difference between you getting a top grade and a second top grade. So breathing, looking to the marks and making sure you've answered all the questions is some of my top tips. So you get into the exam and you're thinking about, the reason I've put the scales there is because quite often they ask you to reflect, balance, draw conclusions. So you've got the on the one hand, on the other hand, and the scales of justice show that you can consider both sides of the answers. So when you get into the exam and you sit down and you're sitting in front of your exam paper, first thing you need to do, apart from taking a deep breath, is to read the instructions. Check that you've read the instructions. Don't assume you know what's there. Look closely at the resources because there will be diagrams and maps that you need to look at. Where it says describe, what do you see, and there's a map and there's a photograph, they tend to give you 1 mark per point that they're looking for. But where it says explain, give reasons, show knowledge and understanding, use examples where possible, they're looking for you to say, oh, I know this, I can answer this. And when you are sitting down for the first time facing your exam paper, highlight the key words so that you know whether they're asking you to describe or explain, because they are different. It says write to the number of marks and the space available. If it's a 2-line question, chances are it's a 1 or 2 mark question. Be imaginative and original in your writing when you are talking about connectives. This means that is because, in addition, as well as. Invite the reader to be curious about your knowledge. Remember that an examiner is going to be marking several scripts and they're all going to be saying roughly the same thing. And if you can stand out as being somebody who's not only got the geographical knowledge, but your spelling and your grammar is a good standard, then your examiner is going to enjoy reading your script. And just as your heart flows with knowledge, their heart will flow with marks. So use geographical terminology where you can. Now, if you can't remember what pyroclastic flow is, just say an ash cloud with lots of volcanic rocks in it. You will be halfway there and they will know what you mean. Or leave a space and then come back to it, because you might go, I can't remember the word, but you go and answer the rest of the question and it pops back into your head. Diagrams, sketch maps, and they will enhance your answer. Do not worry. Do not be over hard on yourself when you say, I can't draw very well, because any drawing creates an inspiration in the mind of somebody else. So, lastly, become familiar with your case studies. We've got a map here of Montserrat, and it's one that has said there's some questions around it, so you could look at that and you can do these activities where it says estimate the percentage of the island in the safe zone, how many maritime exclusion zones might affect the local people, the old capital of Portsmouth and W.H. Bramble Airport had to be abandoned. What problems would this have caused for the people of Montserrat? Now, One of the obvious things would be it's an airport, it's an island. How do people get to and from the island? People would be stuck. I'd hope that if you looked at that question, you wouldn't go, oh, we haven't been taught that. You would apply your thinking and you would go, well, people fly into the island. If the island has been blocked, they can't fly out. So we need to find an alternative way to get people off the island. What might have happened to the population on the island and why? Some people might have been injured or killed in the explosion. Other people certainly would leave because they didn't feel safe there, and there would be a decline in population and popularity as a holiday destination. So, some further research if you wanted to update your knowledge using your internet. What are the hazards of Montserrat today? Do the web search to find out what the volcano observatory is currently showing. Can you do a simple sketch map? And how does the different level of risks affect the activities there? There was a case of some tourists who went to a volcanic island in New Zealand, and they went thinking that they were safe, that the volcano hadn't erupted for a goodly while. And when they got there, dramatically and unexpectedly, they were involved in a live volcanic eruption. People were killed, people were seriously injured, completely unexpected, and the risk assessment was low because this volcano hadn't erupted for ages. And the thing about volcanoes is they might be dormant, they might be extinct, but they might be able to erupt if they are in an area such as Montserrat. And if you go to Italy, you know, Sicily sometimes rumbles around as well. So there is a risk when you're visiting dormant volcanoes that they might suddenly become active. And people do, as geologists, do interesting research because they want to understand the nature and relationship of volcanoes to earthquakes, and they have a curiosity about what goes on in the earth. So when it comes to doing exam practice for volcanoes, we have been given one here to illustrate. You've got some choice answers. So this is what I would call a multiple choice question. It says study figure 9. I've taken this from the textbook. It says page 61. Study the map for Montserrat, complete the following sentences and choose from the box below. So if you were to use the map on the previous slide, you will find that that's the slide that these questions are referring to. There are 4 marks for 4 spaces. Choose the right mark, choose the right space, choose the right word in that space, and you get 4 marks. Now, as far as should permanent exclusion zones be set up around active volcanoes to reduce the risk associated with eruptions, justify your decision. That goes back to that picture of the scales. Justify, justice. There are 8 marks in this question, and without actually giving you the there's a wonderful word to do with this chain of islands, and it's an archipelago. Hang on, where is it? It's not there. It means a curved chain of islands. So where is it? Name the oceans where it is. Name the say that Mount Merapi is in the middle of a chain of islands in the group of islands called North Indonesia. Permanent exclusion zone be set up around all active volcanoes. All active volcanoes to reduce the risk associated with eruptions. Not all active volcanoes are in areas which are heavily populated, but you need to weigh up the pros and cons. You need to think about illustrating examples. So this is where we think about the primary and the secondary effects, and we can think about social, economic situations. So if, for example, you were to go, we need to put exclusion zones around all active volcanoes, the cost might outweigh the benefit. And that's a lovely phrase. The cost outweighs the benefit. The cost would justify the benefits. I agree, I don't agree. thinking about that longer answer question, the fors, the and against. The higher level, higher income countries and lower income countries would have different needs. So if you are in a volcanic area in a higher income country, which is heavily populated, you would want to invest in an exclusion zone. But if you were in the North American Rockies in the middle of nowhere, then why would you want to set up an exclusion zone in a higher level country, higher income country, when there aren't many people around? So you have to think how you are going to plan your answer. And this is something that where practice comes in. When you have thought about your answer and you've practiced it at home, by the time you get into the exam, you can say, that's the bit of knowledge I want, that's the bit of knowledge I want, and I'm going to answer that question. Another exam question here would be plate tectonics. Tectonic processes result in the formation of a distinct landscape. Tick 2 features, so found in constructive plate margins. Constructive plate margins are where materials is added. So you tick 2 boxes. You get shield volcanoes, you get rift valleys, and there you would get your 2 marks. Describe how tectonic processes at a destructive plate margin have resulted in one named large feature such as an ocean tread or a volcano. So this goes back to the diagram where you have continent, you've got land material being scraped off, and as it's scraped off, then it pushes material up and you end up with your fold mountain, and you end up with your eruption and your volcano. So in that, describing the tectonic processes, material being destroyed, large scale feature might be that you've got Mount St. Helens coming up and you are thinking very carefully about the feature that you're describing, basically. So they've asked you for either or answer. And then it says, question 8, analyze the different tectonic processes that have formed a distinctive volcano at a constructive plate margin. Constructive plate margin would have to lend itself to any Iceland eruption. So think about the tectonic processes, thinking about magma rising, thinking about the fact that there are large scale features, small scale features, and put a drawing in to show that you understand that. If we go back up to this slide here, if you were to include either that drawing or something like that into your exam, you would help your examiner illustrate your answers much more confidently. And sometimes remember, you don't have to explain everything if it's in a diagram, because the diagram shows that you know where a subduction zone is. Have we gone back down? So let's go down to this one. Questions which require extended writing are marked using levels mark scheme, A-level mark scheme. To achieve the top level and gain full marks, your answers need to demonstrate exceptional application of knowledge and understanding, a comprehensive change of reasoning, and a balanced appraisal. So this is where sometimes the more you can listen to other people talk about geographical things in a geographical way, the videos, you will find that you somehow become fluent by listening to the other people and the way they answer the questions. Again, these are questions that you can practice. Describe the difference between the constructive and the destructive plate margin. Name and explain the formation of a large scale feature and a small scale feature. Large scale feature would be a volcano and a small one would be a geyser. And finally, tsunamis, earthquakes and tsunamis. If you go back to the beginning of the PowerPoint and you click on the slides for the tsunami, you will see the devastation of the water flowing over the land, and it covers a large area. There is, without doubt, even if you've never lived through the devastation of the tsunami itself, the memory of the Boxing Day tsunami will stay with me as a very real impact. So on an international scale, people all over the world were affected by the Boxing Day tsunami simply because it was so devastating and so unexpected. And you can write about those kind of experiences in your answers if it's invited. So when you're looking at this tsunami, it says circle the correct answers and following sentences. And again, it's 2 marks. Be confident. If you are thinking about, if you've got any doubt, give yourself some thinking time. Look at the question, step away from it, study the photograph. When looking at photographs, the clue is in the photograph. You don't imagine what's not there. This photograph shows you that the building has been destroyed and the roads are inaccessible. 2 marks. Explain how that might impact. So the buildings have been destroyed, so people haven't got shelter, and the roads being destroyed means that rescue missions are hampered. Hampered is a good word. It means that they have been delayed. Use evidence in a resource such as a photograph. You'll only be given credit from answers from the resource. Make sure you elaborate on points so that you gain all the marks available, turning 1 mark into 2. So that's what I said about only write what's there. There is a wealth of information in the videos behind this PowerPoint, and we have a technical hitch with the presentation at the moment, and I do apologise for that. I may find an alternative way to connect next time, because next time we are looking at a different topic, which you are welcome to join. We have 4 sessions to do, and the way we've done it is I've been working in parallel with a colleague, so he's done some presentations and I've done others, and the plan is to raise your exam results by providing you with informative ways to know what to revise. So the middle part of this presentation, when you say, oh, I'm not really sure what I need to revise, there's a good chunk in the middle that if you focus on, for example, slide 14, that stories, the Rift Valley, looking at the terminology, and I need to say, if there's anything I've missed that you've got in your notes, revise them. This may not be an exhaustive list of content, but there's lots of things for you to get to know and to be confident with. The idea of answering questions comes with knowing your subject, knowing what you've got to put in it, knowing what an epicenter is, knowing how to focus. If you live right on top of a volcano, your whole world is shaken. And even in this country, if you are in the right place at the right time, you can feel the effects of a volcano, which might measure on a Richter scale significantly. So your cups and saucers might rattle and your dogs might bark because it's a slight shock. So take some time to re-engage with this PowerPoint and to look carefully at the content of the geographical terminology. Be creative with the way you add ifs, ands and buts into your writing, and be confident in what you're saying to the examiner. You are talking about your passion for geography, your desire to understand, and you're keen to communicate that to other people. And that's really what being examined is all about. It's not there to catch you out, it's there to show off and say, this is what I know.